This leads into some notes that I did type out because, like I say, my brain isn't working particularly well the last couple of days. I have to emphasize that I have no personal experience in this. All I know is that Eddie said in the facts last Friday that the blow-up was on a Richter scale. So Eddie is filling the role Bill Willingham filled in 1994. My phone number is 519-576-0610. My fax number is 519-576-0955. I haven't heard anything from anyone. It'll make you feel better to yell at my answering machine. It's 24/7. The ringer is always turned off, and I'll be happy to listen to your message when it comes in. Yelling at me where I'm not, the internet, is lynch mob cowardice. Okay, LGBTQ Etc. Benjamin Hobbs came up with the cover. This is how we do Therapists in Hell, is the guys come up with cover ideas, and I look at them, and I put them in order of, this is the one that I want to do next. I think this one's a very funny idea. I assumed that the idea that Benjamin Hobbs was coming up with was the etc. The how many genders are there going to end up being? You'd have to ask Benjamin if that's what he was driving at. But Sandy did 2 or 3 strips about it back in the original run. It's not a made-up thing. The City of New York issued a directive saying that there were however many genders there were that you weren't allowed to discriminate against. My questions would be, is there now one definitive list of genders? And 2, how many are there? Or is LGBTQ it? Is this still under discussion? It's like, it's not a discussion that particularly interests me, so I'm not following it, but I think that's a relevant question. I think it's self-evident that genders are genders and sexual preferences are sexual preferences. It's apples and oranges. They're 2 different things. There are only 2 genders. There are multiple sexual preferences. I'm not a homophobe. I don't hate gays, and I'm not afraid of gays. I don't hate anyone, and I'm not afraid of anyone. As with everything else to do with God, I think it comes down to innermost motivation. Why are you having sex? If you're just masturbating using someone else's body, I infer that's morally wrong, and you will suffer the moral consequences in this world or the next, gay, straight, or other. If you have innermost motivations that are beneficent, that are well-minded, that are good-natured toward the person that you're having sex with, and I don't think you've got a problem. I think it comes down to innermost motivation, but innermost motivation, I think, is only known to God. Everyone else is just guessing based on their personal prejudice. I think the T part of LGBTQ, transsexual, is a bridge too far. If you pump a man full of estrogen, he will manifest female characteristics. But I don't believe that makes him a woman. The same as if you pump a woman full of testosterone, she will manifest male characteristics. But I don't believe that makes her a man. When you extend that to underage adolescents, championing adolescent transsexuality ideation over parental jurisdiction, I think that's a toxic political stand. If you can get the vote for it, congratulations. But right now, it's looking like liberalism's Achilles heel. If you won't let go of that, and you force all liberals to believe it, I think think it'll poison the entire liberal body politic, which I think is already happening. And I don't think that we can afford to have that happen. I think we need liberalism, and we need a strong, reality-based liberalism. Even if medical science gets to the point where it's able to do a full penis and testicle transplant and a full womb and vagina transplant, I don't think the result would be a man who used to be a woman or a woman who used to be a man. It's just Frankenstein science. I'm willing to go to prison to defend my right to believe that and to express that view. Living in Canada, that seems the most likely outcome. What's needed in society, and what I think the internet has effectively destroyed, is tolerance. Genuine tolerance, as opposed to fake tolerance, is measured by your ability to tolerate that which you fundamentally oppose. Best example I can give is how tolerant are gays of President Trump, as an example. Barely, if at all, would be my guess. Parity is protected in civilized society. If I find your political views funny, and I find a funny way to exaggerate them, which I have with LGBTQ Etc people, that's as protected as what Alec Baldwin does with President Trump on Saturday Night Live. President Trump and his supporters tolerate that. Barely. They don't celebrate it, and they don't champion it. But genuine tolerance isn't about celebration and championing. It's about tolerance. I acknowledge that you exist as a citizen of a democracy. I hold it to be self-evident that your life and fundamental liberties are to be protected the same as mine are. I don't have any special liberties, and neither do you. If there are things and people you barely tolerate, then you can't be surprised if the reaction to you is that you are barely tolerated. If you have zero tolerance for things and people with which and with whom you disagree, you can't be surprised if you elicit zero tolerance in others. If you self-righteously participate in online lynch mob, destroying lives and careers, you can't be too surprised when your own life and career are destroyed. Karma and hubris exist, and I believe were created by God for that reason. Do unto others, and it will be done unto you, to paraphrase the Golden Rule. You won't see it coming, and it will come from an unexpected quarter, but it will come.
Okay.
A deathly silence fell over the crowd.
Well, I'm giving it a pause. I agree pretty much wholeheartedly. I mean, I work with a bunch of people that, they're internet reactionaries, basically. I mean, they read something online and immediately go off on a tangent about how horrible whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, but let's look at the context. Like, the one example that sticks in my mind, and this happened probably a year ago, is a woman at work looking on her phone, and there was a mass shooting, and President Trump was responding to the mass shooting. And somebody commented about, hey, you should just ban guns completely. Well, the name sounded really foreign, and she's like, well, it's a terrorist. I'm like, what's the name? And she told me, and I'm like, where is this guy located? And she said, India. I'm like, I doubt that he's a terrorist. I think he's an Indian.
Right.
And he's, it's if you're in America, gun violence is gun violence. If you're in Australia, gun violence is a completely different thing. And if you're in India, it's common sense in India of, well, hey, if everybody's shooting somebody, why don't you take the guns away? And I'm looking at the perspective here of, okay, this is, but in her mind, nope, he's a Muslim terrorist because he's got a funny sounding name. And I'm like, that's, India's majority Hindu. I think if anything, he'd be a Hindu terrorist, and I don't think they have those.
Or a Sikh. I mean, that's one of those. I think we should probably acknowledge as a society in general exactly how detrimental 9/11 was to Hindus and Sikhs particularly, because anybody that looks like that has got to be a Muslim is a default setting for the uninformed. But at the same time, it's as someone who prays 5 times a day and fasts in Ramadan and acknowledges God's sovereignty, I still understand, and I'm still very tolerant of people's attitudes towards Islam. If you're a Christian, the mere fact of this religion existing, where one of its centerpieces, philosophies, is that God does not have a son, and it is blasphemous to suggest that God has a son. That's very difficult not to take as threatening from a Christian perspective. For me, it's a matter of over here when I'm doing my Christian observance, when I'm reading John's Gospel, yes, it seems very, very definitive that God has a son. And later in the afternoon, when I'm reading from the Quran, it's very, very definitive that God does not have a son. My conclusion is, well, how would I know? I'm not God. I assume that, as it says in the Bible and as it says in the Quran, all of these things will be settled on Judgment Day. Here's what you didn't understand, and here's what was being said. It's not that God was implying this or God was implying that. We were inferring incorrectly as God's creation.
Which goes back to the classic bit from High Society between Astoria and Service. The speaker implies, the listener infers.
Right. And also the thing that we were talking about in the last time that we had this chat, that people seem to be having a great deal of difficulty realizing what is an opinion and what is a fact. The pressure to not say things, that you can't say this and you can't hold these opinions out loud in our society. And it's like, the hell I can't. I live in a democracy. None of us are completely informed on anything. Walk into the public library and look at all of those books. How much of the information in those books do you know? And yet you still have opinions about all of these different things. But know the difference between an opinion and, Newton's laws of motion. You don't have to pass laws prohibiting people from dissenting from Newton's laws of motion. It's not in that category. Most of Canada is cold in the winter. Saying that doesn't make me a coldest. It's a fact. Most of Canada is cold in the winter. It's April and most of Canada is still cold.
That's trying to think. There was a TV show where somebody's like, I don't believe in gravity. And one of the other characters was like, well, how can you say that? Well, lately I don't feel like I'm being pulled. I feel like I'm being pushed.
There you go.
And you know, it's one of those, it's a funny joke, but then you start thinking, well, are we being pushed? And then you get, you know, well, it's just a theory. You know, the theory of special relativity. Well, yeah, but it's a really sound theory. That's why it's taught as, yes, it's still just a theory, but we're pretty sure we got this one in the bag and we know what we're talking about.
Well, we're certainly seeing a lot of incidents of that in society. The vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, that would have been inconceivable. I mean, those vaccines started when I was a baby. I'll take the blame for it if you want. But you know, the latest newspaper headlines are about teenagers who are the children of anti-vaxxers, but who believe in vaccination, and should you vaccinate them behind the parents' back? That's a very interesting question. It's like, I don't know if we're talking about herd immunity, and we sort of accept the fact that when you drop below a specific threshold, then you're talking about, you know, having regionalized measles outbreaks where there are just too many people that haven't had the vaccine. Yeah, you probably do want to do it behind the parents' backs. But as a civil liberty aspect, I think you definitely want to have parents having jurisdiction over their children. The same problem, like I say, that I've got with this transgender thing, that 13-year-old boy who says that he's actually a girl. I don't think that you can override the parent's jurisdiction and say, okay, this is a transgendered girl, and we have to treat her as a girl from now on, and if you won't treat her as a girl, then we're going to take your son/daughter away from you and rear her over here in this LGBTQ environment.
It's one of those things. I mean, the vaccination thing. It's one of those. I'm pro-vaccination just because, you know, my wife's in the healthcare field. I'm into science, and the science says we used to have polio, now we don't, and this is why. And I'm, you know, yeah, I understand that, you know, yes, as a parent, you know, you're gonna stick what in my kid, but at the same time, well, you know, I don't want my kid to, you know, have polio. So that's why, you know, I'm pro-vaccination. And as far as, you know, if I were anti-vax and my kids were to do it behind my back, well, hey, it's done. What can you do? You know,
right.
On the one hand, you know, the cow has left the field at that point, you know, or the horse is out of the barn. I mean, once it's gone, it's gone. There's no do-overs here where, okay, we're going to suck the vaccine out. And I can see, you know, if a parent truly has objections that, you know, well, you know, I didn't want my kid to, well, okay, we're sorry. We won't do it with your next kid if you have a next kid. But as far as the transgender thing, that's a guy at work who's really conservative. I jokingly will say on bad days, is it 30 years from now yet so I can retire? And he's like, well, people can make up their gender. Why can't you make up your age? Just tell them you're old enough to retire. I'm like, I don't think they're going to give me my Social Security check, Casey. I really don't think so.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting time period. I think that's really a slippery slope. If you say you have to treat people as they perceive of themselves, then you get into a very dicey area. It's interesting that at the same time that the left is putting together this one right way to think. Here is the list of things that you have to believe, and if you don't believe these, then you are expelled same time that everybody is individualizing so radically. I don't talk to too many people in the course of a given day or a given week or a given month, but I can't go 3 sentences into a conversation without finding something that I fundamentally disagree with them about. And I think everybody's in that situation. I think that's why I'm advocating for tolerance. Train yourself to be tolerant by contemplating whatever it is that you think is the complete opposite of good. This is what I think is evil, or this is what I think is completely wrong-headed, and realize that there are people who think that way. And if there are people who think that way, they have to be allowed to think that way. You can't advocate physical harm. But in terms of this is what somebody thinks, this is what somebody thinks. I don't think that there's a danger of this wildfire kind of Hitler Nazism. I don't think we're in any danger of that. We're all individualizing too dramatically as it is. I think what we have to do is come up with a baseline. This is what constitutes an education, and no longer teach opinion in school. Anything that is in doubt, you don't teach that. Strictly factual things. Which I think would be beneficial. This is what a sentence is. This is what the subject of a sentence is. This is what a noun is. This is what a verb is. It doesn't matter what you feel about the verb. It's either a verb or it's not a verb. If it's a verb, it's a verb. If it's a noun, it's a noun. Let's teach stuff like that instead of here's what the latest craze is for whatever political faction is dominating the educational system. It's like no, let's just teach pure facts and avoid opinions, because there are just too many opinions to teach. And if you want special days or special classes where you do share opinions, well, let's share all opinions. What I think we want to avoid is anybody self-appointing themselves the arbiter of what you're allowed to think and what you're not allowed to think. Okay, Matt, I'm going back to bed before I have a relapse.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling.
Okay.
We'll do this again in a month when hopefully everybody's feeling better.
I hope so. Thank you very much for faxing me the picture of you with Janice and Natasha. It's like I'm sitting there looking at it and going, they got their birthday cards. They actually got their birthday cards. They're holding them because the birthday cards are just, don't forget whoever it is today. And because if it doesn't go out today, I got one that's got to go out today, or it's not going to get there for the 11th. I think it's probably going out tomorrow anyway.
Well, I got home and I saw the envelope from you, and I'm like, uh-oh. My mom was like, whoa, you got a package. How is it not? I'm like, I'm not expecting anything this big from Dave. This could be good, this could be bad. And I open up, like, oh, this is really neat. So thank you for the super service number 1.
No problem. Thank you for being one of the last 92 people.
Well, I'm definitely going to be in the teens when we get to the teens. Unless something bad happens to me between now and then.
All right. hi to Paula and Janice and Natasha for me.
Will do. Take care. Get back to bed.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.